Well, welcome everyone. It's so nice to see so many people here. And I know that some folks are traveling and therefore could not make it. And just want you to know that I have happy news when it comes to Norma, who's not here. Her son, Kevin Kellogg, is being inaugurated as the 11th president of the University of Richmond this weekend. So that's where the family is, and of course she's very proud of him, and we're so happy for her. Anyway, the first order of business is to get the elections underway, and our slate of officers include Sarah Schooley for president. She's not here, so you can't see her face, but I mean, she's fantastic. And then Louise Reilly as the vice president, and that's Louise, and she'll be giving a presentation today. And Betsy McGinnis as the secretary treasurer, and I know Betsy's here at the back. And Gigi Barnhill will stay on as the archivist. So there's Gigi. Do I have a motion? Second. Second, and is this by acclamation? Is this sorry? Yeah. All right then. Easy. So, Madam Vice President. Oh yes. So I am supposed to give that floral bag that Maxine gave me to Sarah, and it's been sitting in my house for a year. And every time I see it, I tell myself, well, 10 more months. And Sarah's not here, so I'll have to give it to her in May. Anyway, I'm going to give a very, very short president's report. I have no idea how the women of this Travelers Club, what they did and how they managed it during the 1918 Spanish flu. I have no idea because the club was going at that point. But let me tell you, it's not been easy. I took over last May, and that was half a year of meetings later, because I think the fall semester, the fall months, we didn't have any meetings, and then we had some meetings in spring, right, over Zoom. Then when I took over in May, I always tell Maxine that she assured me it was a very job. And then I found out that we were to have 8 meetings, and for these 8 meetings, we've met at 4 different places. Okay, we've met here at the club, we met at Edie's place out in her garden once. Then we did entirely through Zoom, twice I think, and then in May we will be going to the boathouse for lunch. So 4 different venues. Let's hope that Sarah and you all don't have to worry about this. So basically, after each meeting, I had 1 week of reprieve, and then I was scrambling and what to do for the next meeting. And I really could not have done this without Catherine, who was so wonderful and warm and generous, and has opened this club for us and to us at a much reduced rate. Let me tell you. So I know many of you are doing double duty. You belong to us, and you also belong to the Women's Club. So please thank them all for giving us this beautiful space at an inexpensive rate. And plus, I have to thank Hank. He has done so much for us, whether it's hybrid or Zoom or whatever. So thank you, Hank. You've been just absolutely wonderful. And then there's John Lombardi, and Catherine's husband, Chancellor Lombardi, as I call him. He has been dragging in the monitor and the camera and all kinds of equipment every month, and so please thank him for us. And let me also tell you that he once opened the toilet while he was here. I never thought you. That's what chancellors do. I never thought my chancellor would be like the toilet, but there it is. And then I need to thank all of the speakers and the hosts and the co-hosts. I know this is not easy dragging things here. I mean, when I drag back and back and back, I was afraid that Louise and Sarah might think I was planning to move in. Anyway, finally, I could not have done this without the wonderful officers, Susanna and Joanne and Gigi. They just absolutely came through with guidance and everything else. And I would just, the last couple of times I've written to them and I've said, promise you it's the last time I'll be bugging you, last time, and then it never is the last time. So they were just fantastic. All the new people here, just so you know, I have been part of the group for maybe 3 years, maybe, and I just knew these people. And I didn't do anything until I became the president. And then that's how I met all of these wonderful people sitting here. So I really encourage you people to jump in and do whatever you want to do, give a presentation or host or be a co-host or whatever it is. You know, I feel so honored that I've gotten to know all of you this last year. So please, new people, you know, keep that in mind. Just a couple of bookkeeping kinds of things. If you have not paid for the luncheon or given Joanne your luncheon choice, please do that. And also, if you have not paid your dues for the club, please do that too. And that's important because as I turned everything over to Sarah and Louise, we want to make sure that they're not stuck with unpaid bills and all the rest of it. So, please do that. I think that's all I want to say. So, Louise's title is Mark Twain and Elmira. So before I get to that, I'm going to just talk a little bit about my new role. One more thing. Joanne, do you have a quick report? You want to say something? Oh, okay. Sorry. There should be a sign-up sheet for next year going around.
Yes, it's the sign-up sheet for host and host.
Yeah, I'll bring it. Okay,
And
great.
the
Okay,
speaker,
come
to the room, like buys the luncheon.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'll be turning the job of secretary treasurer over to Bessie McKenna. So we want to have everything in order too. So again, we want to thank all of the people who were speakers and hostesses, from Ruth Owen Jones, who spoke about William Smith Clark in September, Honoré Davis, who spoke about Lady Bird Johnson in October, Nina Scott, who spoke about Martha Jefferson and all of Jefferson's intricacies. And then Sheila Clem spoke about her trip on the canals throughout New York State and Pennsylvania. And then in February, Holly Linton, who was the daughter of Susan Linton, spoke about her program that she did on 10,000 haystacks, which was a photo journal that was very, very interesting also. And then Gigi spoke about Henry James Ware's trip from Montreal to the Columbia River. So we've, and now today we're going to talk here about Mark Twain. So we've had, I guess COVID has prevented people from going away, but there has been talking about some of the important people in American history or Canadian history. So the balance at this point, there's still some outstanding bills. The balance at this point is $1,884.39. We pay the Amherst Women's Club $75 per meeting here, and we have paid Hank Allen for his technical services for the Zoom, and also there was a small amount paid out for name tags for the new members. So that leaves us, and this $1,884.39 will be available for expenses for next year, because that includes many people who, I would say about 75% of the people have paid for the dues for next year. So that leaves us with a bit of a cushion there. So if there's any questions, Warrant Savings Bank is the bank, and they have They have changed their drive up. So beware if you're in the wrong lane there and you don't have a debit card. Yes, one of the lanes for drive up at the Florence Bank has changed. They are not, there's no person there, there's just a machine, just like everywhere else. Anyway, okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Joey.
So, we need to get going on the presentation. Susanna and Gigi, would you like to say something as DT, or I just say from where you are?
So on behalf of the archives of this club, the older last couple of decades, our Jones Library special collection. And we've given special collections of $100 to help with housing that collection. So they're there. And anytime you want to look back in the archives, just let Cindy Harbison know, make an appointment, and she'll bring them on out. So they're accessible to us, bring in any other.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking if we don't have enough speakers next year, I'd like to rehash or Dottie Fusa's trip across Russia to Japan.
Fascinating.
And how many do you remember? You must remember that, Nina. And Sarah, do you remember it too? I mean, I don't know how many of the wonderful programs are in the archives. Also, just to rehash, okay, for next year, we've got the sign-up sheet. I guess it's out there someplace. I will also bring it to the luncheon, so that if you haven't signed up. But I just encountered a little hitch, and it's kind of important, I think, because nowadays we are not using screens and slide projectors anymore. So we kind of need this. Well, I don't have a setup like that. I don't know how many of you do have a large room with this kind of fancy TV. Donna does. Okay. Yeah, I know. I mean, so, well, we need to think about that a little bit when we're doing our.
We do have a digital projector that can be hooked up to a computer. That's what we did.
Oh, okay. See, that's how ignorant I am about
So,
it.
I don't really know how to use the projector, but it's the one that Shannon had, and I'm sure that
Okay.
I didn't collect the.
Well, okay, then let's discuss
And
it.
also I have the screen that belongs with the projector, so actually we're set. We
Okay.
don't really need to go high tech.
Fabulous, okay.
Assuming that we're not trying to do.
Okay. Now, you all can sit back, close your eyes, and listen to me drone on, okay, a little bit. Okay, right here, whoop. Well, we did have Mark Twain there. This is obviously taken from a newspaper, but sort of a classic picture of him at I think it's at Quarry Farm, or at the house, the Langdon House in Elmira. So you want to go to the first map for me, please? All right. So we all associate Samuel Clemens, and oh, by the way, I should back up. I'm going to refer to him as Samuel Clemens or Sam or Clemens, because to move back and forth between Mark Twain and Clemens is awkward. And a lot of this has to do with family, friends, town, so on. So I thought I'm just going to stick with Samuel Clemens and variations on that. Okay. So we all associate Samuel Clemens with his alter ego, Mark Twain. And we associate him with Hannibal, Missouri, Hartford, and his time out west as a young adventurer and journalist, where he adopted his nom de plume, Mark Twain. He had many homes over his lifetime, but perhaps the most consistent was the time, excuse me, he and his family spent in Elmira, New York, at Quarry Farm. So here we are. Elmira is is in the southern tier, right down here. Okay, and it's, you can see we're pretty close to Corning, Ithaca, and Watkins Glen there. So Elmira, New York is my hometown, and it's located in the southern tier of the state. Early settlers began fur trading with natives of the Cayuga Nation along the Chemung River Valley. By the 1860s, there was a population of about 15,000 with spacious Greek Revival and Victorian homes, and they were growing up along tree-lined streets. The Erie and Northern Central Railroads and others passed through, as did the Chemung Canal. Back to the canal theme a little bit. enabling transport of Pennsylvania coal and Chemung pine via Seneca Lake to the Erie Canal system. Can you give me the next one, please? So here's Elmira, there's Corning, Ithaca, Watkins, and the canal went right up here, right through there, and then you could give me the next one too, please. Okay, so here we are. This is the top at Geneva. I don't know how many of you have seen Geneva. It's a beautiful town at the top of Seneca Lake. And Hobart William Smith is located there. So then there's a little Seneca River that goes over to Seneca Falls, which is, of course, well known for the women's movement, and on up into the Erie Canal. Okay, so this is how goods were moved to the north and the west. Let's see, okay. Prosperity and ambition led to the founding of Elmira Elmira Female College in 1855. It is the first women's college to grant a baccalaureate degree. Sheila knows because Sheila went to Elmira College.
He told you go give it to Jeanette.
Yeah, a lot of people think it's Mount Holyoke, but it's not correct. Maybe it was because Cornell was so nearby. I don't know. It was started in 1855, was it?
Cornell was much later than Elmira.
Was it? Okay, good for you. Okay, in this up-and-coming economy came Jarvis Langdon, who became involved in all of the local enterprises. He accumulated great wealth, but also, with his wife Olivia, was a devoted abolitionist. He was a conductor on the Underground Railroad and became a friend of I'm sorry, I've been drinking and I've been talking too much and eating too much. Okay, Frederick Douglass, when he helped Frederick Douglass escape from slavery. And Douglass spent many times in their home when he was traveling on lecture tours. The Langdons and their fellow abolitionists broke away from the First Presbyterian Church, and that's where I grew up going, and of course, a lot later, and to form the Park Congregational Church. Thomas K. Beecher, stepbrother of Harriet Beecher Stowe and Henry Ward Beecher, was soon hired as a minister for that church. We'll talk more about him later. So enter into the stimulating community and closely knit family. In 1867, the Langdons decided that travel with tutors would be preferable for broadening their sons' horizons than a university education. His name is Charles. At the tender age of 18, Charles became part of a so-called refined party of 67 on the steamer Quaker City, going to the Holy Land and stops along the Mediterranean. Samuel Clemens was also among the passengers, having contracted with several papers to write about the experiences and observations. This was a rather pious group. So for relief, some of the gentlemen on board gathered to smoke, drink, and play cards. And of course, Charles and Samuel Clemens, Sam, were among them. So Charles Langdon and Samuel Clemens, who was 33, enjoyed each other's company despite the disparity in their ages. The story goes that Charles had with him a miniature portrait. Should be the next one. Okay, this is the Langdon home. I'm sorry, I didn't miss that. Okay, and then the next one. Okay, this is Charles and Mark Twain. And then the next, please. Okay. So he had with him a miniature portrait of his youngest sister, Olivia, and that smitten Sam frequently requested to see it. He claimed as long as he lived, he never saw another woman. And you can see she has quite a sweet face. After their return and later that year, he met up with Charles in New York, and it happened that the rest of the family was in the city. He was invited to go to dinner with them, and then with such a success that he continued while he was there to go to musical events, plays, and so on. After their return and later that year, he met up with Charles. Oh, I read that one already, sorry. Though he was invited to visit the family in Elmira, business in the West kept him away for 9 months. He later arrived in Elmira at the station, all rumpled on a steamy evening, and you can imagine him in his white suit, all wilted and disheveled. And so his future son-in-law, Charles, suggested he maybe change clothes. And he said, well, I do have a change of clothes, but I really don't have a hat. So he had to wait until the next morning to go to the haberdasher to get a hat for his property. Okay, so he spent 3 happy and gay weeks with the family, with 2 more visits that year. His affection for Livy grew stronger. They called her Livy, too, things from her mom, I guess. Livy, too, was somewhat enamored, though she was not easily won. After giving a lecture in town, he wrote that she felt the first symptom of love on Sunday, and that the lecture on Monday brought the disease to the surface. 2 days later, she confessed that she loved him. Does anybody have a? I might need a lot, but sorry. So Brother Charles, he was such a rough and ready character. Charles was a little worried he might be not quite suitable for his sister, but his father kind of recognized that he was a diamond in the rough. So Jarvis' father asked Clemens to get some recommendations. There's some testimonials to his worthiness. Thank you so much. He asked him to get some testimonials to his worthiness. So he got in return rather tepid responses from preachers and former employers. And, excuse me. And so Jarvis came to inquire if anyone approved of him. He declared that he knew Clemens, the diamond in the rough, better than they did. I will be your friend, he said. He approved their engagement in February of 1869. Lizzie's adopted older sister, Susan, and her husband, Theodore Crane, as followers of his work, endorsed the union. To his mother, he wrote, she is only a little body, but she hasn't her peer in Christendom. He was madly in love with her, all their married lives. Following their engagement, Clemens toured the country, lecturing about his trip and working on his manuscript for use abroad based on that trip we have. Livy became his most helpful and keen critic, a position she enjoyed throughout the rest of her life. I have something for you to be on. Thanks. Okay, I'm gonna have to, thank you. Okay. That's all right, I may need it. Okay, thanks. So this editing was called Dusting Off Papa. He needed a lot of dusting, I think. Almost a year to the date of their engagement, they were married in February 1870 before 100 guests. And it happens that an very elderly, when I was growing up, lady, she was in her 90s when I was taken to see her. And she was a friend of my parents, and she remembered going to the family events and the wedding, and she was friends with the children. And when Hal Holbrook came to Elmira to do his thing, she got into a conversation with him as if he were really Mark Twain, and he responded to her. You know, it was really quite a charming thing. So moving right along. So as a gift to the couple, Jarvis bought a home for them in Buffalo, where Clemens was currently working for a newspaper. And he also helped Clemens become part owner of that newspaper. Soon after the wedding, unfortunately, Jarvis Langdon fell ill, necessitating frequent visits to help with his care, and he died in August of that year, 1870. Langdon Clemens was born prematurely in November of that year, leaving a delicate Livy in an extended recovery. In April the following year, 1871, the business and house in Buffalo were sold, and the family spent the summer in Elmira. Livy's older sister, Susan, and her husband had been given a wedding present gift of the Langdon's former summer home on a hilltop overlooking Elmira and the Chemung River Valley. That summer was the first of many happy, productive summers spent. I think it was a total of 20. So here it is. This is an old photo of the farm, and here's another one. Another view. I have some nicer ones later on. So these are old ones. Well, it's probably. It was that summer during which Clemens finished roughing it, while at the same time he was making plans for the family to move to Hartford to be closer to his publisher, Howell. To the family's great joy, Susan, or Susie as she was called, was born in Elmira in March of 1872. Sadly, followed in June by the death of her sickly brother, Langdon. To help Libby recover, there were long sojourns to England and various seasides, so it wasn't until May of 1874 that the Clemens family returned to Quarry Farm. Soon after their return, Clara was born. Clara was the longest lived of them all. That summer of 1874, Susan Crane had a private study. Let's move on to that. Here, yeah, go to the children. Okay, she had this study built because he smoked constantly, cigars, 10 to 20 cigars a day. And the children, of course, would drive him nuts because they were young and they made a lot of noise. So that's just a picture of all the children. Okay, so the next one, please. And also I just wanted to point out, this is supposedly built on the style of a riverboat captain's cabin, but I think an octagon was kind of an architectural conceit of the time, so I have a feeling that that was an influence as well. So it was situated in front of a little drop-off where the quarry had been. And so there was a perpendicular wall left over from the quarry. Above that was an old bark-roofed arbor covered with American creeper and blood-red greenery where the children used to play. But it was farther enough away, they couldn't disturb it. Okay, I'll show you some more pictures. As it grew up, this and another one, there are a bunch of them, a couple ladies outside. And I remember this as a child. It was still in situ, if you will. Go ahead, another one. And this is what happened when it grew up. It looked quite different. Okay, let's go to the next one after that. Okay, some days he wrote as many as 50 pages of Tom Sawyer that year. Other days he would laze in a hammock next to his brother-in-law, Theodore Crane, to read and discuss books. They had several favorites, which they revisited every year. One, please. In 1877, he wrote about a free-born black man, John T. Lewis, who had come through Pennsylvania and through Maryland. From Maryland, he came through Pennsylvania because of Elmira's reputation for helping blacks. He worked for the family and was a tenant farmer on their land. Clemens, who chatted with him frequently, developed a great respect for him, especially after Lewis stopped a runaway horse, pulling a carriage full of family members down a hill. It was careening down a hill, and he pulled in front of it and grabbed the horse. And so some scholars feel that he was a model for Jim and Huck Finn, while others feel he was just one of several men who were part that made up his character. Another influence was a cook at the farm. Her name was Mary Ann Cord, and they called her Auntie Cord. She was an escaped slave whom Clemens wrote about in an 1874 story for the Atlantic Monthly after he chatted with her at great length. He titled it, "A True Story Repeated Word for Word as I Heard It." It was the first time he wrote in Black vernacular or anything other than humor. He tried to recreate word for word her retelling of her life story as a slave sold twice and separated from her husband and children. Scholars believe that his association with the Langdon family and their abolitionist friends, in addition to his close acquaintance with Black household farm help, no doubt had an impact on his attitude towards slavery, emancipation, and equality in general. The following year, he spent in Europe, so the family did not return again to the farm until September of 1879, when Clemens set to work on a tramp abroad using material he collected the previous year in Europe. And we can start the next group here. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed this. Okay, this is John T. Lewis, and another one of him with his wagon. Okay, and then if you could do the next one, please. And this is Auntie Cord right here. So the family gathered on the porch of the farm. Okay, the next one, please. Okay. So when he returned, he wrote, he was so delighted to be back. He wrote to a friend, "You have never seen any place that is so divine as the farm. Why don't you come here and take a foretaste of heaven?" So I have a bunch of more modern pictures. If you just go, that's a view looking at it and more. And you can see the river, well, the river is off in the distance there. It's hard to see it there. One or two more, I think. And I think another, there he is sitting on the steps to heaven. Another, I think there, and that's just a classic picture of him. All right. He seemed to have gotten gray very quickly. I couldn't find, he's either looking very young or he's there with masses of gray hair and gray mustache. In the summer of 1880, third daughter Jane, called Jean, was born. Clemens worked on Huckfin and completed Prince and the Pauper, dedicated to his daughter, that he dedicated to daughters Susie and Clara. 1881 saw Clemens working on lesser works and found him lazing a good deal. 1882, the work was like life on the Mississippi after a visit to Hannibal. In the summer of 1883, he wrote several hundred pages of Huck Finn, which he'd begun a few years before. He wrote his publisher, Howells, "I haven't piled up manuscripts so in years as I have done since we came here to the farm 3 weeks ago. I wrote 4,000 words today, and I touched 3,000 and upward pretty often, and don't fall below 2,600 any working day. And when I get fogged out, I lie abed a couple of days and read and smoke, and then go at it again for 6 or 7 days. I expect to complete in a month or two, and I shall like it whether anybody else does or not." So Huck Finn was finally completed in 1883. In 1884, he and Libby worked on the proof, "More Dusting Off of Pop." Daughter Susie commented that a turned down corner that meant some delightfully terrible part must be scratched out. Clemens once responded to his wife when she complained about something, "You got the notes, Libby, dear, but not the tune." The Grant family were friends, family friends. He visited them in 1885 and unfortunately died soon after. I think his family was in financial straits, so his memoirs were published by Clemens Publishing Company and to financially aid the Grant family. 1886 or 1888 work concentrated on Connecticut, Yankee and King Arthur's court. 1889 was the year a very young Rudyard Kipling visited. En route from England to India via the US, he was wishing to interview Samuel Clemens for his newspaper. Starting his search in Buffalo, he was directed to Elmira. After a night spent in a cheap hotel, Kipling set about a challenging search for his target. Finally, directed up the hill to the farm, he arrived there only to be told the family was having lunch at the Langdon home in town. So down the hill he went. He arrived dusty and tired and hungry, as most of the family was settling into their meal. Clemens, who rarely ate lunch, invited Kipling into a parlor next to the dining room, when enticing orders wafted his way. Soon into their conversation, Clemens recognized Kipling's great talent. It was the beginning of a long friendship, with many of their letters joking about Kipling having to ignore hunger pangs during their first conversation. 1889 also began years of tribulation, unfortunately, for the family, starting with the death of beloved brother-in-law, Theodore Crane, followed soon after by Libby's mother and Clemens' mother. Trying to recoup financial losses, I think we all heard about this. He incurred by risky investments in questionable businesses and inventions. The family spent several years on the continent traveling and giving lectures to make money. In 1895, they returned to prepare for a real world tour, lecture tour, after declaring bankruptcy. Libby and Clara accompanied him on that tour. After a successful year, they received news in London that Susie was very ill in Hartford. She was expected to live, so only her mother, Libby, and her sister Clara returned. But while they were on ship returning, she succumbed to meningitis at age 24. Her father lost the light in his life. He really, really loved Susie. I don't know if I can say it was a favorite, but it's sort of implied. Libby's health became very precarious. She was always very frail anyway. And various cures were tried in Elmira in 1903, then to Maine and Florence, where she died in 1904. He wrote, "An hour ago, the best heart that ever beat for me and mine was carried silent out of this house, and I am as one who wanders and has lost his way. Our life is wrecked." And another thing he wrote to a friend, oh no, this was in his autobiography. "She was slender and beautiful and girlish, and she was both girl and woman. She remained both girl and woman to the last day of her life. Under a grave and gentle exterior burned inextinguishable fires of sympathy, energy, devotion, enthusiasm, and absolutely limitless affection. She was always frail in body, and she lived upon her spirit, whose hopefulness and courage were indestructible." His last trip to Elmira was to see Clara, who became a singer. She had a recital at the Park Church, and there was also an dedication of a new organ at that time. In 1909, the daughter Jean, she was born Jane, but they called her Jean. She had epilepsy, which would become much more serious, more frequent seizures. On Christmas Eve, she had a seizure in the bathtub and died from that. She probably drowned in the bathtub. It was pretty gruesome. The following year, Samuel Clemens, having become a lonely, rudderless old man, died in Reading, his home there. It was called Stormfield. Like his friend John T. Lewis, he came in with Haley's comments and by his own prediction went out with it. A woman whom they'd hired in Elmira years before was with him, and she was with every single member of the family when they died. Her name was Katie Leary, and she went on to write her own descriptions of her time with the family. The whole family, we can move along a little bit here. Oh, this is his funeral in New York at the Brick Church, and then this is the Elmira Woodlawn Cemetery. It could just, there are a whole bunch of pictures, we can just run through those. And kind of an interesting cemetery, actually. There was I learned much later in life, there was a Confederate camp, prisoner of war camp there. And they were terribly treated, of course, but there was apparently a whole area of the cemetery where those poor people were buried.
Louise, was Libby buried with him?
Yes, they're all buried.
Oh, yeah.
There's the whole family. In fact, the daughters, even Clara, who she lived into 1952, died in California. She was a singer professionally, and she was married to Gabriel Lavich, who was a famous, I think he was a violinist. And then somebody else, he died, and then somebody else's name is kind of unpronounceable. I don't know, but I think they're all buried there, all of them. Okay, so now I have run through all the dates and the significance of events, but I want you to tell you a little more about his downtime and about the Clemens family around him at that time. When he wasn't writing, he would play games with the children, often inventing the game. He would read from his day's work, even after the evening meal, frequently in gaining insight into how he might improve what he had just written. He also gave lectures at the Elmira Reformatory at the request of his friend Zebulon Brockway, who brought an experiment in penology to the town. And this reformatory is huge. It still exists. Did you remember that, Sheila?
I have a
Big.
story I'll tell when you finish.
Okay, well, when I was growing up, it became a kind of a catchment area for criminals. They'd bring them up from New York and then they triage. They kept the less serious criminals there and they moved the others someplace else. Anyway, okay. So anecdotes abound about his antics and witty essays that he published in the paper and hoaxes and the like. He liked to hang out and drink and play billiards with his acquaintances at Clapworth Saloon. Of particular interest is Clemens' relationship with Thomas K. Beecher, whom I mentioned earlier, and particularly the Park Congregational Church, which is very interesting in its own right. Now, it was like Beecher was there for about 20 years before they finally built. If you want to go on, I can show you. It's not a very good picture, but the only pictures I could find just didn't represent the size of it. It's the whole block. It's huge. Also, as I mentioned at the beginning, the senior Langdons were active abolitionists and as such supported the hiring of Thomas K. Beecher, later helping to build the church. Beecher, whose father said he was the brainiest and the handsomest of his children, he was the step, as I mentioned earlier, or half-brother of Henry and Harriet. And he was definitely an unconventional sort who eschewed many of the trappings of the clergy. He dressed in work clothes much of the time in order to help those in need with repairs of all sorts. He had skills in engineering and carpentry. He'd go around and repair people's sewing machines. His interest in science led him to correspond with scientists at the Royal Academy in London, Royal Academy of Sciences. He also, this is Thomas K., also enjoyed sports, singing. He was anti-prohibition, although he liked to drink. He loved to let fun. He invited people of all faiths to services and took in a young prostitute whom he and his wife Julia raised as a daughter. He was so unconventional, in fact, that he was thrown out of a ministerial union he'd helped to begin. Other pastors did not approve his preaching at the local opera house before the completion of the large church. He was so popular that he needed a big opera. Clemens wrote a very, very clever, sardonic essay about this for the local paper, which you can imagine. The physical church itself was not important to Beecher, unless it could have multiple uses. The new church included an infirmary, bathing facility, parlors for free use, a billiard room and billiard table in one of them, a dancing hall, a large dining hall where folks could entertain large numbers, and there were 2 to 3 place settings for tableware in the kitchen. They had weekly suppers, a children's romp room, and then once a month they had a children's service it was all children involved, and the parents could come if they wanted to. Clemens was a great friend of Beecher's, and they spent long hours chatting and debating. One Sunday found them sitting against a tree, deep in conversation, when a parishioner appeared to remind Beecher, also in rumpled white, that the service had started without him. He was so engrossed in the conversation. And most of my information about Beecher and the church came from an interesting essay written by Max Eastman, who from the age of 11 lived in a duplex apartment within the church. His parents had been hired as assistant ministers, and his mother was one of the earliest ordained female Protestant ministers. Max's sister, Crystal, a lawyer, you may recognize as a dedicated activist who testified before Congress lobbying for a constitutional amendment allowing women the right to vote. She also helped to found the ACLU. To end, I'm going to jump back to an anecdote. I'm going to read it to you if I don't run out of voice, but I think it shows the fun side of Mark Twain, and it's actually written by the grandfather of a friend of mine. We went to Sunday school together, and we knew each other for a long, long time. Okay, so at about 4:30 on a summer afternoon in 1883, I was standing on the south side of the Washington Avenue Bridge. In my small hand was an apple, which I intended to land within the stack of the engine drawing westbound Erie number 1. The apple, true to its mark, shot downward. Out of the billows, vapor, and smoke, my shrill voice proclaimed, "Jumpin' Christmas, I hit it." As the ponderous train thundered under the bridge, I turned to dash across the roadway to the other side and collided with something. "Jumpin' Christmas, you hit me," echoed a voice. The smoke swirled aside, revealing a man in rumpled white clothes with a big cigar in his mouth. "Give me one," he demanded. With the apple I supplied, he strode to the other side and let it fly. It hit the roof of the last car and bounded off. "Get it by gum," he announced and slapped me on the back. "Anybody can do that," I yelled. You'd ought to pop one down the smokestack the way I did." "All right," he said, "where's your smokestack?" All day long, a switch engine plied back and forth beneath the bridge. With each puff, the exhaust, at least a peck of roasted apples popped merrily on the spark arrestor within the bowl-shaped stack. "Look at him jump," he chuckled and squeezed my hand. I liked him. It was hot. The crew lolled sleepily in their seats in the cab. It was a good time to practice. My acquaintance proved to be an apt pupil. The pockets and lining of my jacket were soon emptied of fruit. I held out the last apple. "You need it," he said. "No, you like it." He produced a nickel. "Heads I win, tails you lose," he cried. He agreed. The engine charged forward toward the bridge. Too late, I saw the engineer peering up at us. I caught at the man's arm, but only deflected his aim. The apple bounced from the boiler casing to the cab where the fireman was sitting. The engine, which was moving slowly, stopped. Simultaneously, the crew jumped down, one crossing the tracks toward the west, the other crossing to the east. Appalled, the man and I looked at each other. My heart pounded. "We are in for it," he said. "They can't catch me," I said, "but I ain't so sure about you." I crawled up the sloping iron truss to its level center member and laid flat. The man held his ground. Hot and angry, the engine man arrived at about the same time. Missing me, they asked the man if the young devil who was always shooting apples was his son. "Gentlemen," I heard him say, "do I correctly observe that you have left your engine unattended? Unless you return at once, I shall feel it my duty to report your violation of rules to President Jewett." From the way those two hurried back to their work, I realized that my unknown friend must be someone pretty high up. When I came down, his eyes were twinkling, but he said, "Okay, you can see, Sonny, can't you, that you might have been a cause for a serious accident. I guess you won't be throwing any more trains, right?" Another story. Okay. This is funny. I listen to them all the time, so I understand, and they certainly go on at the least expect time. That's no problem. Gives me a chance to go through.
Twain would love it.
Yeah, he would have had something to say, I'm sure.
It's the white horse.
Okay. Yeah. So anyway, so he said, from the way out of that, he said, "Sonny, can't you might have caused a serious accident, and I guess you won't be throwing any more trains, will you?" "No, sir," I replied earnestly, and in my relief overlooked that it had been his shot that had provoked the crisis. "What's your name and where do you live?" he asked as he relit his cigar. "Eddie," I said, and pointing to the substantial brick house nearby, told him that my grandfather had built it. It was built right near the college and was the first house up this way. He removed his cigar and pursed his lips to a silent whistle. To be polite, I said, "What's your name?" The name he gave me meant nothing to me. I was 7. He said, I guess you like the railroad, don't you? You bet, I replied. When I grow up, I'm going to be an engineer. Then I told him that I kept a book with the numbers of the freight cars in it. They must be pretty big books, he observed. Yes, sir. Would you like to see it? Some other day, he said. I've got to be getting along. It's right down here, I said. I urged and pointed to a pile of ties, which are crisscrossed down below. With my hand in his, we left the bridge and returned to the tracks. The ties were piled crosswise, leaving innumerable pigeonholes. One of these books I took out was a ledger that my father had discarded, but the man had spied the old shoes that I kept in the ties. There must have been 100 of them. Most were flattened by car wheels. I told him that I never put them on the main track, only on the siding, where the trains went slowly. He seemed puzzled. They make dandy bumps, I explained. He agreed that they would. He weighed a small shoe in his hand musingly. This one, he said, was worn by a beautiful princess named Rosina. Oh no, sir, I corrected. My Aunt Fanny wore that. I repeat, he replied severely. Rosina, you see this broken strap? Well, one dark night, Rosina tried to escape from the castle in which her cruel uncle had imprisoned her because she would not marry a rich, selfish foreigner. As he proceeded to lead the brave struggle of the princess, I forgot about Aunt Fanny's rights in the matter. He took me into a never-never land, from the contemplation of which my mother's voice heartlessly summoned me. We slid from the tie pile. Now you run, Eddie, he admonished, or you won't get me supper. I watched him until the white suit blurred in the gloom of on Railroad Avenue. At supper, my mother was visibly worried by my excited recital. My father reprimanded, don't ever let me hear you talking to a stranger man again. But he wasn't strange, Papa. I remonstrated. He told me his name. Who did he say he was? Mark Twain. My parents exchanged startled glances. Then my father sniffed. That couldn't be him. But it could, my mother differed. How did he look at him? His eyebrows were kind of bushy, I answered, and he had a droopy kind of mustache. And when he took off his hat, his hair wasn't combed. He talked kind of slow, and kind of slow-like, and I wasn't afraid of him. It was Mark, all right, Father conceded. Then said to me, get that book from the parlor table. I knew which one he meant. I had looked at the pictures 100 times. Father read Innocents Abroad frequently. I gave him the book. He lifted me on his lap, then said impressively, the man who threw away our apples is the one who wrote this book. Now, I'm just a couple more things that so I wanted to point out that now Quarry Farm was given by ancestor, another Jarvis Langdon, in 1982. So it's now a study center, Mark Twain Study Center, and that's one more there. And this is where the study is on the Elmira College campus. It was moved there, I think, in 1955, because there were vandals carving initials in it and so on. I do remember, though, seeing it at the farm. This is a random picture of Liddy. I didn't like it so much, too serious, so I didn't post it. So that's just my talk. I wanted to share something. Share about
Well, this is a train story too.
yeah.
I lived in Williamstown, Massachusetts, and in order to get to Elmira, which is in the middle of nowhere, my apologies.
Well, if you were on the right line, you would
Well,
get here, but
it was my sophomore year at Elmira, which was 1957 to 68. And I took the train from Albany. We had to go from Albany to Binghamton,
yeah.
where the feedy snow, the
Yeah.
really great big train, came from New York City and went west. Where I don't know where it ended up, but it stopped at Elmira. So I was train to come. And inside the station where I was having a cup of coffee, 3 males walked in. 2 were middle-aged guys, and then there was this really handsome young man. And I said, ooh. So we were all sitting together, and finally the train came. And I went in and sat in the train, and these 2 older men sat behind me, and the young guy, the really cute guy, sat next to me. So I was thinking, ooh, this is going to be an interesting train ride. Normally pretty boring. So I started talking to this young man. And I'm talking about books and literature and all kinds of things. And I thought, I said to him, he asked me where I was going, and I said, Elmira. He said, oh, I am too. I thought, well, this is getting really very interesting. So we got to the Elmira station, got out of the train, the 2 guys behind me and this young man, and the minute we got off the train, I noticed that they put handcuffs on this young man. And one of the older men said to me, you were really very nice on the train. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, most people don't talk to our prisoners. Apparently, they were calling him from New York to the Elmira Reformatory. And so my dreams of maybe were dashed.
Yeah, there were a lot of railroads actually, the Leary and the Lackawanna went through, and there were like 3 or 4 stations at one time. I think there were 2 when I grew up.
I thought you were going to say, and that is how I met you.
Yeah, I mean, Jarvis Langdon was really kind of amazing. He and his son-in-law and his son owned mines all over the country, eventually. They were fabulously wealthy men, but gave much of it, well, of course, in the early days, when the slave train was, or Underground Railroad was going through the church, actually. And as a kid, I used to want to see where the railroad was under the church. I thought it was really under the church.
And I think Lizzie, his wife, had actually gone to Elmira College.
She probably did. I mean, this whole area, this whole swath from Elmira up, and that whole area, because the Underground Railroad took people up there, the women's movement was all up there. And it was really quite a progressive area.
Chautauqua, I don't know how old Chautauqua is.
That's over near Buffalo, closer, yeah.
Right, but I mean, that's.
I don't know.
area.
Yeah.
Geneva.
Right. Oh, yeah, Geneva. Someone told me that one time that was supposed to be the Atlanta of the North. I don't quite get the connection there. Why? Because were the canals near Atlanta sometimes? I don't know. But it is, I mean, the architecture there is beautiful in Geneva, the top of the lake. And then the bottom of the lake is Washington Glen. There's a beautiful glen there, and of course that's known for car racing too. Yeah. Okay, any questions? Okay, yeah.
If you don't want questions.
No, that's fine.
I was just curious when you mentioned that, that Clemens moved to Hartford to be close to his publisher. I just don't understand in those days, why would you want me to be close to the publisher? I mean,
Well, maybe physically it was easier to pass, with manuscripts around along. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it was a age of reason. I'm sure that there's more information about it. I'm not clear. I mean, because they lived in Hartford. I can't remember when they gave up their house, and I think probably most of you know about their later years and his proclivity to invest in, and he got fascinated by things, but sometimes invested in them unwisely or didn't get good advice. And then in his old years, was very sad, really. I mean, I think he was probably a kind of senile, and there are all kinds of stories around his last years. Very, very sad too. I mean, about Jane and Susie and Clara kind of was independent. She went off and sang.
So how did Hartford
Yeah.
Thinking of it, I really.
When I was down there, I went to a lecture by Skidmore, Kettlewell was his name, Skidmore Professor of American Art and Architecture. Ever heard of him? That was his specialty, I think, maybe Victorian art. Anyway, he was giving a talk, and we met in a carriage farm and we couldn't go in the house because it was being renovated. So that's the only time I sat down there. But they all live near each other too. I think the beachers all live near there too.
Right in that same.
Yeah.
Neighborhood, yard, yeah, there it is.
So he was always interested in having the latest thing. So anyway, interesting.
Interesting topic, Louise.
Yeah, very nice.
Yeah, I thought maybe you'd all fall asleep because I've rehearsed it so many times. I can hear you up in there. I did change it up. I didn't do the apple thing. When I did this once before, some might not know this. But when Barbara Holdley was alive, I remember giving it to her up, and I think it was a business meeting too, because I think I had to rush through it.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Well, I did finish. You know, I did it about 45 minutes afterwards.
That's great.
Thank you, Hank. At the last minute, I arrived, I gave him the sun drive, and the pictures were all out of order. So he sat there and put them back into order, because I brought my iPad with me, fortunately, where they are. So thank God for iPad. Thanks.
Well, we are, didn't you guys?
Oh, we're
Yes, but they still want to on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
Nobody on Zoom.
nobody.
So there are people on Zoom.
It'll be recorded. We get very much. Watch it.
Okay. I can tell my children. I'm sure they're going to watch right away. Thank you. You're welcome.